I picked burnout as the topic, not only because I recently did a comic about burnout, but also I'm pretty sure within the last year, almost everyone has had burnout for one reason or another, and I know I certainly did. uh, that's okay, Justin. Come and go as you please, or as you can. Alrighty. So, let us start with what we're dealing with. So, autistic burnout is intense physical, mental, or emotional exhaustion. Yeah, sorry, I have to do the picture because my internet isn't good enough to do video as well. Watch my first two live streams to see what happens when I have video. But yeah, autistic burnout is intense physical, mental, or emotional exhaustion. It can bring about a loss of abilities or just functioning. So often it can be brought about just from living in a world not made for us. Neurodivergence existing in incredibly difficult. So much of communication is subtle, and we end up missing it, which can lead to stressful situations due to miscommunications and misunderstandings. This world is bright, it's loud, and really just not the best environment for us. So it makes sense that it would cause us to burn out. It's more common and intense in those of us who are going through school or are working. School and work environments are often competitive, hostile, and hectic. They're stressful for anyone, not just autistics, but often autistics experience negative aspects of these environments more harshly. But when we voice our struggles, we're often told to suck it up. We don't get the help we need. So we just keep running ourselves to exhaustion until we burn out. Experiencing autistic burnout is different for each person. Some people may be physically exhausted, they may even get physically ill. Others may have trouble managing their emotions, which may make them prone to outbursts. It can manifest in intense anxiety and or panic, which is what happened with me. It can also come out as depression. It can increase repetitive behaviors, lower your tolerance to sensory exposure, and lessen your ability to adapt to change. Sometimes it can just make you feel like you're a zombie living on autopilot and just getting the bare minimum done. Basically, just coasting in survival mode. It could be a loss of creativity and inspiration. I know when I burned out, I was getting zero comic ideas and was really worried that the well had finally run dry. But thankfully, that wasn't the case, and I eventually started getting new ideas again. It can also look like executive dysfunction, sitting around wanting to do things you find fun, but unable to actually get motivation to do them. I know that there have been times I've just been staring at my video games, wanting to play something, but if I was ever able to actually choose something and begin playing it, I could only manage to play for a few minutes before getting tired of it and shutting it off. Much like with many aspects of autism burnout, uh, sorry, much like many aspects of autism, a burnout looks different from person to person. Um, yeah, Kirjo. I've been seeing your comics. I really like them. If you're wondering why you've never heard of the concept of autistic burnout before, if you haven't, it's because it only recently started being looked into. In the past, autistic burnout only applied to family members, teachers, and caregivers experience burnout from dealing with autistics, instead of burnout experienced by autistics. It's only been within the last 5 years that autism researchers have actually realized that autistics get burnout too. And they learned about it by talking and actually listening to autistic people. Some people wonder why it's important to listen to autistics when we speak about our personal experiences with autism, and this is why. When you listen to us, you learn more about autism. There's so little research that's been done on autistic burnout because no one outside of autistics even knew it was a thing. We've experienced it, but we never had a name for it before. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that I just figured that everyone had to deal with this and that they were just stronger and better at handling it or hiding it. Turns out that no, we're not weak. We're just different. It doesn't help that whenever we would speak up about our struggles, we'd be gaslit into believing that it wasn't real. So we'd ignore it until we just broke down. This is why self-advocacy is so important. This is why we need to keep working on making our voices heard. The more we speak up for ourselves, the more people can actually learn about it and learn about us. When it comes to those too young to speak for themselves, it's also important to understand autistic burnout, since even infants and toddlers can experience it. When this happens, it's usually called autistic regression, but that's such a bad term. It's called that because the child may lose ability to speak, or their vocabulary may become limited, or they may start avoiding eye contact. But this isn't autistic regression, it's autistic burnout. Not understanding this has caused a lot of harm. Parents usually don't notice the more subtle signs of burnout in their child, so it isn't until the signs become more severe that it's finally noticed. So they see it as coming on suddenly. This has led to some parents believing that their child was neurotypical until they reached burnout and pointing at a whole bunch of things to blame for their baby suddenly becoming autistic, including vaccines. That's right. Misunderstanding autistic burnout in infants and toddlers helped the anti-vax movement gain validity and grow. My mind was blown when I read this. So much harm has come to humans in general because autistic burnout wasn't understood. If anyone tells you that understanding autistics isn't important, tell them this. Oh, isn't this a meltdown or shutdown? Sorry, I'm not up to speed on terms. Burnouts can cause meltdowns or shutdowns. But yeah, burnout is overtime stresses bringing you down.
Another way to think of this phrasing is when someone has their standard amount of resources to get through a day in terms of mentally, and when they're pushed too far, the next day it doesn't feel like you have quite as much to work with. And so burnout is when you get pushed too far day after day after day after day till you wake up one morning and those resources already aren't there. So you've got nothing to work with at the start of the day. And in many situations of those with burnout, they are asked to continue anyway, trying to work when they already don't have anything.
Thank you. Yes. You are so much better with words than I am. Oh yeah. I'm autistic. The COVID vaccine is going to level up my autism. Yes. I find that, I love that one too, Shimmer. There's a lot of things that can cause autistic burnout. Stress, masking, social isolation, lack of support. We're forced to act in a way that appeases those around us, but tires us out. Maintaining eye contact, following a script when socializing, suppressing our stims, and forcing ourselves to tolerate sensory inputs that may be overwhelming to us. We do our best to fit in by bending over backwards for others in hopes that of making some kind of connection with others. And honestly, this can be more than tiring. It can be hurtful. I remember listening to Neurodivergent Rebel talk about masking, and they brought up something I had never thought of before. But when they talked about it, I realized that it was something that I had felt. Masking can hurt our self-esteem. When we mask, we're accepted, but when we don't, we're ostracized. Those we mask around prefer the masked us over the unmasked us, and that really hurts. When they see our authentic self, they recoil, letting us know that the real us is not the version of us that's desired or wanted by some people. This adds on to the stress of masking, constantly telling ourselves, don't be weird, don't be weird, don't be weird. If you're weird, they won't like you. It makes us feel like there's something wrong with us. It further isolates us because it forces us to mask even at times when we're too exhausted to. We maintain this facade because in the past, if we didn't, we were bullied and harassed. We were taught throughout our lives that what behaviors were deemed acceptable and which ones weren't. So we do our best to hide the unacceptable, quote unquote, behaviors, even if those same behaviors are used to calm us down in stressful situations. We push ourselves beyond our natural abilities until we finally can't push ourselves anymore and we break. I wish I could give advice on how to stop this, but I can't. I can't control when I mask and when I don't. I'm not. It almost feels like I'm not the one putting the mask on and off. Sometimes I can't socialize because I'm too tired and I don't know how to socialize with my mask off when it comes to most people. It's the same with going outside. If I'm too exhausted to mask, I try to avoid going outside because I know that if I do, I'll be pushing myself too much. Other things that can cause burnout is stretching yourself too thin, having too much on your plate, and not pacing yourself can cause anyone to burn out. But when you add autism into the equation, it can cause you to burn out much sooner and much more severely. Constant schedule changes, prolonged exposure to things that can cause sensory overload like fluorescent lights, or just background noises that you can't block out. Lacking much needed support but denied access to it, like noise canceling headphones, or just another person to help lighten the workload. When at school or in the workplace, there are expectations put upon everyone. But when you can't meet those expectations because you're all overwhelmed, or something is causing sensory overload, or you're just really tired from masking, you don't always get the option of ducking out and unwinding. We have to keep working and stretching ourselves beyond our breaking point. Many autistics have lost jobs because of burnout. They can't just go to their boss and say, "Hey, I can't keep working at this pace. Can I slow down?" Or, "Hey, this task is too difficult for me. Can you give me something that I find simpler?" No. You keep going until you can't anymore. You push yourself beyond what you're capable of. You keep pushing and pushing. You ignore your body and your brain when they tell you to stop, until eventually you burn out and you're forced to stop. This is why sometimes burnout can make you physically ill. Your body has been pushed so hard that it gets sick. Whether it's too tired to fight off a bug, or the stress of it all causes health problems such as digestion issues. It's similar with school. If you don't work hard enough, your grades will suffer. You don't think about what will happen if you push yourself too hard because there's so much pressure on you to succeed that you don't think about it. Since I don't have much experience with the workplace, most of the times I've dealt with autistic burnout is from school. I remember in grade 9 completely skipping the last couple of weeks of gym class because it was my most stressful class and I had exams to study for. I've always been pretty good at studying. Heck, one of my favorite things to do is study up on something new I just learned. My problem with school was the classmates and teachers, and gym class was the worst for me. My school had gender segregated gym classes, so it was an all-girls gym class, and most of the girls were either bullies or shy and quiet. One of the biggest problems was that one of the bullies was the teacher. I was treated in a way that was a constant reminder that I didn't fit in. No matter how much I masked and tried to fit in, it was never good enough for them. Eventually, I realized the stress from just being in gym class with these people was wearing me down to the point where it was affecting my ability to study for my exams. So I just skipped gym class for the rest of the school year. I would just hide and study. I know that if I hadn't done that, I would have burned myself out, and I didn't care enough about that class to push myself beyond the breaking point. Now with college, I did push myself beyond my breaking point. I did fairly well during my first and second year. I was taking business accounting. I got my 2-year college diploma and wanted to go for a degree, which would have taken 4 years in total. The third year was all group work. Not a single project wasn't group work. I tried so hard to succeed. I didn't want to just drop out because I was putting myself in debt for this. And I didn't want to have nothing to show for it. Eventually, I was pushed too far. I burned out because I didn't have any option to ease my stress. Even though the teachers knew I was autistic, they refused to do anything to accommodate me. So I dropped out. Burnout often happens during a transition period in our lives. Puberty, switching schools, changing jobs, moving, and other stressful changes. I was misdiagnosed as bipolar not long after I hit puberty. And I bet that the severe mood swings that I was experiencing was from autistic burnout. Not only had I started puberty, but I had just changed schools and one of my best friends had moved away. Too much was changing and I couldn't handle it, so I burned out and lost my ability to regulate my emotions. Since bipolar ran in my family, and I didn't show the typical male signs of autism that was often looked for, my psychiatrist put two and two together and accidentally got five. Well, autistic burnout is only experienced by autistics. Burnout in general isn't. There are certain aspects of burnout that are universal. Both autistics and neurotypicals can get burnout from overworking. No matter who you are, if you're stretched too thin and not given the support you need, it's going to wear you down. And if you do it for too long, you're going to break down eventually. Other things like not doing self-care, not letting yourself rest, or not being given the option to rest, and poor sleep quality are going to lead to burnout. There are similar symptoms that autistics and neurotypicals share when it comes to burnout. Fatigue, anxiety, depression, and physical illness are felt by all of us. However, there are plenty of differences as well. Neurotypicals don't have to deal with masking the same way we do. Neurotypicals do sometimes need to mask to fit in with the culture they're surrounded by, like when hanging out with their group of friends or when they're at work. If you want to see a neurotypical mask, go to a retail store and watch them deal with a Karen. That is top-notch neurotypical masking. But this masking is different from when autistics mask. Autistics mask specifically to hide our autism. It's a defense mechanism, and it's often automatic. We don't just do it to fit in. We do it to survive. We're taught from a very young age that our autistic traits should be hidden if we wish to avoid harm. Trigger warning ahead for the murder of autistics. I'm going to wait a second in case anyone wants to nope out. You can come back in a few minutes or you can just mute the live stream. Okay? You'll know it's safe when the trigger warning is no longer on screen, all right? Okay. So, we see news stories and we see news story after news story of parents killing their autistic children and the parents being viewed as loving caregivers forced into a desperate situation, whereas the autistic person is seen as nothing but a burden. Autistics being killed by cops isn't anything new either. I remember a story in the news about a mother calling the police on her teenage autistic son who was being violent. The mother just wanted the police to talk her son down, but instead they killed him. This is so much more true if you are autistic and a person of color. It makes sense that autistics who see those sorts of stories will try as hard as possible to hide their autistic traits in hopes of avoiding death. There are even stories of, oh, yes. In the Sia movie, Music, there was a lot of backlash because there was a scene where the autistic character, Music, gets restrained. And restraint in the past has killed autistic people, especially children, like in schools. You've heard, I've read stories of autistic children who are having, emotional outbursts, and the teachers would pile themselves on the child and they'd eventually die. So you see this and you're like, well, gosh, if I don't hide the fact I'm autistic, I'm going to die. So, yeah. So, trigger warning, down. Okay, off that topic. Let's get back to the topic of autistic masking in a less violent manner and why it's different from neurotypical masking. Autistic masking is incredibly draining in and of itself. It isn't just exhausting because we're dealing with a situation that forced us to change our behaviors, but because we have so much that we need to ignore and control. We have to endure stimuli that can be overwhelming and we can't escape. Itchy clothing, loud music, too many people talking at once, bright lights. We just have to suffer silently with this. And when we want a stim to calm us down, we can't. Another difference between autistic burnout and neurotypical burnout is, as I was talking earlier, the causes. Neurotypical burnout is usually caused by work or school, while those are big reasons why autistics burn out as well. There are other reasons that don't really affect neurotypicals. Many autistics have a lot of trouble dealing with change. So a change in a work schedule can do a lot more to push an autistic towards burnout compared to a neurotypical. I know neurotypicals who jump from day shifts to night shifts and back like it's nothing. I know it isn't actually nothing. It's probably pretty stressful, but they can keep it up for years. Other things are, of course, sensory issues, as I was saying before. An autistic is most likely going to be a lot more stressed out in an uncomfortable uniform or noisy environment than a neurotypical. Autistics are also going to be less likely to make many, if any, social bonds with classmates or coworkers. So they'll feel more isolated. If it's a retail job, an autistic is more likely to have social anxiety or be socially awkward than a neurotypical. I know someone who got fired from a retail job because they couldn't control the volume of their voice. So they kept unintentionally yelling at customers. Keeping a job is often a lot more difficult for autistics. And having that as a constant stressor can be really draining. To walk into work every day knowing there's a chance you might be fired because you'll behave in a way your employer or customer may deem inappropriate. Say you're stimming or you're how do you spell it? Say this. Echolalia. Sorry. Echolalia? There we go.
There you go.
Causes you to repeat what someone said to you, and suddenly you've lost your ability to pay rent and bills. How autistics recover from burnout depends on the person and what caused the burnout in the first place. Burnout can last minutes, but it can also last years. As we get older, burnout may become more common and harder to recover from. Usually the first step is to remove yourself from the situation that caused the burnout in the first place. It's a lot easier to recover when you don't have to mask. I know this sometimes isn't an option, especially if you're at a job and you need that job. But in that situation, I can suggest maybe taking a sick day. I don't know. Um, there are some people who were well into adulthood who didn't realize that they were autistic until they reached burnout. It wasn't until that they finally saw that they had been masking for decades and finding out that they're autistic and learning how to take their mask off that they were actually able to recover. Removing the social expectations and the unconscious need to mask can help the healing process, whether it's going to be a short process or a long one. Sometimes recovery is something as simple as going to your bedroom to be alone for an hour. But other times it's as severe as dropping out of college or leaving a job. Sometimes it's even breaking off a relationship. Recently, Facebook reminded me that I cut a toxic friend out of my life 8 years ago, and that was probably one of the best decisions of my life. It's surprising how utterly exhausting constantly walking on eggshells can be. The second step is to be patient with yourself and reduce your self-expectations. When we hit burnout, sometimes we can lose access to skills, or our ability to do certain things may decrease. It may be harder to go about your day-to-day activities as easily as you used to. And that's okay. It's frustrating and can make you feel like you're less than you once were. But that's not true. Your abilities will come back, but you need time to heal. Remember that this isn't your fault. These things happen. And beating yourself up over it isn't going to help anything. Feel free to take more breaks. Indulge in your special interests more. Stim more often. Also remember that it's okay to ask for help from friends and family. At least those who are accepting of you and won't just call you lazy or something like that. There's no shame in getting help. We all need it from time to time. I'd say that the third step would be therapy. I know not everyone can afford it, though. A therapist can help you find coping mechanisms to help you deal with stress, but you can find coping mechanisms on your own or with the help of a loved one. It was my partner who helped me figure out coping mechanisms. Different things are going to work for different people. I can't sit still and I can't shut my brain off, so certain forms of meditation are impossible for me. I had to find something that worked for me. What works for you really depends on how your brain works. For some people, it's listening to music. For others, it's jogging. Find something you like and puts your brain into a positive place. Although that may be really tough, especially right now. After the year we had, maybe a bit harder to be positive, but hey, there are certain things to look up to. You may need medication to help you. If burnout caused high levels of depression or anxiety, medication may be the best thing for you. Again, it really depends on the person. I'm not a professional therapist. I'm just speaking from experience. Please don't take my word as one of authority. And finally, whether you've recovered enough to get back to life as normal, or you're still in the recovery period, I'd say the final step in recovery is prevention. Learning your warning signs and finding methods and strategies to calm you down can help you have less severe burnouts less often. The most important thing to do is learn your triggers. Learn what sets you off and how you can most effectively avoid them as much as possible. Also, learn your own signs that you're headed towards burnout. Keep in mind that the feelings and behaviors that arise as signals that you're reaching the edge. Self knowledge is such a valuable asset when it comes to taking care of yourself. Hey, whatnot, I take Zoloft as well. Yeah, it definitely has been helping me too. I'm glad it helps you. Knowing how you react to certain things helps you learn what you should avoid and what you should indulge in. Are you sensory seeking or sensory avoiding? What helps calm you down after specific situations? What stims are best for what stressors? Being self-aware can help you perform better self-care. If you know what works for you, you'll know how to react better when you start to become overwhelmed. Nothing is better for a person, whether autistic or not, than knowing your triggers and your recovery methods. Yeah. And sometimes you can't avoid your triggers. And I know I've been in that situation as well. And all I could do in that situation was wait it out. I had severe burnout. I remember, roommates that caused me to burn out very harshly. And I just kept being worn down because I didn't have an escape. And I'm hoping that one day you can find that escape. Move out or something. Do you want to add anything with how you helped me find ways to avoid, when we first moved here to China and you helped me find my coping mechanisms? You could talk from your experience.
Sure, I can do that a little bit. One thing that usually I am good with is observing other people, so that definitely helps me on this. I mean, I'm a teacher, so I kind of have to. Am I successful all the time? No, but with this, when it comes to coping mechanisms, the big thing that I've noticed in terms of helping someone develop them, and again, this is completely amateurish. I am in no way a registered psychologist or psychotherapist, although I swear that is kind of under my job title anyway, so I'm becoming an amateur. Is just being aware of what it is someone does that is positive in nature to them. Something that is a habit that seems to be enjoyable to them. For example, when someone, like Teresa said, is always moving, has a hard time sitting still, if you're going for a coping mechanism, you want to have a coping mechanism that can have movement as part of the outlet. You need to be watching for patterns like this. If someone, like I've seen in here, Robbie talking about chewing and stuff like that, then as an outlet for coping mechanisms, chewing should be something that should be accessible and involved in order to allow them to have a proper outlet and redirect that energy. Now, the stress of coming to an entirely new country is something that I am okay with because I've chosen this before in my life, but is entirely unique for Teresa.
Also, one thing is right before we left, I was still on a lot of medication for my misdiagnosis of being bipolar. So essentially, I, with the help of a doctor, got weaned off that medication because we didn't know what was and was not allowed in China. So we also had to deal with that and figuring out coping mechanisms to deal with my lack of medication.
Indeed. And what basically went with this is keeping an eye out for what triggered those episodes of, oh my God, I've got a ton of stress, and figuring out ways around it. For example, Teresa does enjoy social interaction with good friends, but it takes its toll. So we've developed a certain thing like if it's getting too much, I watch for when she gets quiet, and then I'm checking, do you need to leave? Not always is the case. Other times is things like signals, just like, hey, this crowd's too much, we got to get out of here. And that can be a way to stave off a lot of it, like squeezing the hand or that kind of thing. A lot of it is, I think of it from the social dynamic, just because that's when I see them most of the time. But a lot of the other ways we developed them was just thinking about what were positive outlets. And what that meant for Teresa was, okay, so movement's part of it. You need to have a goal. Okay, so if you need to move, if you need a goal, if you need to just do something and get out of the house because everything is too much, buy a carrot. Yeah, I know that might sound a little silly, but having a goal, stepping out, just going to a store to buy a carrot with minimal social interaction, getting it out and going and forcing themselves to go through a walk through a nearby park, which is the goal of this, is to get them out moving away from people in a different environment that is soothing to them, was one of the things that we did, because both of us noticed that walking through that park was calming for Teresa. And that was kind of how we went about it, is we would take different things, different aspects of common traits and apply them and try them out in different ways to see if that would act as a calming effect. It was a lot of trial and error. We did a few silly attempts. But yeah. Well, what's up is clearly I care at all. Right? I care at all about this. Oh, was that a pun? Bad me.
Thank you. I figured since you're the one who helped me figure out my coping mechanisms, it would be good to get, your input. And thank you for that, and thank you for helping me find my coping mechanisms. It was very useful. As some of you may remember, on October 26th, 2020, I took a 16-day break from my comic. The reason for this was burnout. It wasn't working on my comic that caused the burnout. It was dealing with the public on social media, as well as an increase in life stresses. I'm the only mod on my comic's Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, DeviantArt, Pinterest, and Patreon pages. But thankfully, 99.9% of the interactions people have with what I post is wonderful. I'm so lucky to have such wholesome fans. Sadly, dealing with that 0.01% can be so exhausting. I've had to deal with a couple of death threats. I've been told that I'm a terrible influence to autistic people, and that I do harm to the autistic community. Trolls, I can often deal with. I usually just roll my eyes and block them. It's the people who have actual hate and vitriol to throw at me that can sometimes do damage. I'm already pretty socially awkward and anxious, so shrugging this stuff off is already pretty stressful. Being a public figure is a lot harder when you're dealing with social anxiety, but I can usually manage it. However, there was so much going on at the same time as well. My partner had to go back to in class teaching, there was the American election, and cases were rising in Canada, so I was scared for my family. Still am, honestly. I was trying to deal with all of this silently, and eventually it was too much. I broke. I ignored all the signs that had taken me so long to learn and pushed myself too far. I just kept telling myself, I'm fine, when I wasn't. I wanted to be strong, but part of being strong is knowing when to stop and back down. So I removed myself from the situations that I could. I backed off from social media and the news as much as I could. Um, I played a lot of video games, I napped, I snuggled with my cat, and I chilled out as much as I could. I kept working on my comics since it's my main creative outlet and is pretty therapeutic, but I slowed down my output. Also, I just wanted to say thanks to all the it was because of all the incredibly kind and supportive comments that I got from fans that helped me avoid feeling guilty for taking a break. It was the first time I had taken a break from my comics since I started it 2 years prior. I had prided myself in that fact, but there's no pride in pushing yourself beyond your abilities to the point that you're forced to shut down, despite what company managers might tell you. I needed help, but refused to ask for it because I was worried that I was going to be a bother and wanted to avoid that at all costs since I knew that everyone else was already stressed. I didn't want to be another stress for others to worry about. So I kept it all to myself in hopes that I could just deal with it on my own. Once I was past the breaking point, I finally asked my partner and a friend for help. And they did what they could for me, which I am so grateful for. During my burnout, I lost my ability to write new comics. Socializing went from something that was tiring but fun to something that caused panic attacks. My energy was in the pits, and I was struggling to take care of myself. Now, 3 months later, while I'm back to writing comics, I've definitely slowed down compared to before. It's easier for me to tire out, and I often need more recovery days after socializing than I once did. I know I'm not fully recovered yet, but I'll get there. Now that the Chinese New Year break has started, I can relax more. My partner doesn't have to go to work for a while. We can sleep in, and life in general is going to be calmer. I'm already planning to take another break from my comic in February, just for a week. And I'm hoping that when my partner goes back to work, I'll be closer to fully recovered. From now on, I'm going to make sure I do what I can to prevent another burnout. I've learned from this, and as I go forward, I'm going to be better to myself. So, as usual, answering emails. Um, I was worried this week for this live stream I wouldn't have any emails to read off, but I got one last night, so that works. So the email reads, is it normal to fade in and out of hyperfixations? Like, for example, sometimes I'll be hyperfixated on one thing, then sometimes just kind of leave it. And my answer to that is yes, it's perfectly normal. There are those who do have hyperfixations for that last their entire lives, but personally, I've never had a hyperfixation that didn't eventually fade. Some last years, like when I was a child, my hyperfixation was Sailor Moon for so many years. But some last days. But for me, they always fade. Sometimes I've lost interest in hyperfixations only to regain interest in them sometime later. Usually it's something like Gargoyles, Disney's Gargoyles, which is, such a magnificent show. Except the third season, which never happened. I find that this is both a good thing and a bad thing, that hyperfixations do fade. It's a good thing because it means that I expose myself to more things, more subjects, more shows, more hobbies, more fan artists. There are some fan artists who I started watching because of one hyperfixation, only to have them start making fan art of another subject, and me becoming hyperfixated on that. There's one artist I started watching for their She-Ra fan art, and then they shifted to Troll Hunters, so I watched that and became my new hyperfixation for a while. However, the bad thing with this is that when they do fade, when it does leave, I often fall into a depression until I find another hyperfixation. When I don't have a hyperfixation to lose myself in, sometimes life can just become more stressful because losing myself in hyperfixation is one of my stims. It's a major stim. If I don't have that, it can be tough. And I wish I knew how to avoid that. Thank you for that email. And of course, if you have an email, if you want to ask me a question or ask for advice, my email is in the description. Feel free to send me an email. And yes, Robbie, Xanatos is a greatly written villain. And we've gotten to the point of the video where I thank my patrons. And as always, I start with my dad, who has helped me through my entire life. And of course, helped me supported me ever since I started my comic, which is awesome. Big thank you to Dominic for being a $10 patron. Very much appreciate it. As much as big appreciation to Nick for also being a $10 patron. If you become a $10 patron, you also can get your own personalized picture drawn in my comic style. But of course, I must give love and thanks to all of my other patrons. I appreciate you all so much. It means a lot to me that, you see my work and you go, yes, I want to put money towards that. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. Again, I am so sorry about the mess up with when I scheduled it. That was my bad. When I when I have the time that I put on the picture that says, 7 a.m. or p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's like 8 p.m. or a.m. Like, I'm 13 hours ahead of Eastern Standard Time. And so, like, I looked at that and I'm like, okay, 7 o'clock it is. And I put 7 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. Because these live streams, like this one, started at 8 a.m. for me. And that's where the mix-up happened. I was tired yesterday. I woke up, had breakfast, and immediately played D&D, and that just zapped all of my brain energy. But the D&D was super fun. So, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. You're all so wonderful. I hope you learned something. I hope I helped some of you in some way. Again, I'm not a professional. This is just stuff that I've learned through life. And if I didn't help you, I'm sorry. But yeah. So, I don't have a live stream next week, but I will have one the week after. So, yeah. And then I'm taking a break for a week and then live streams the last 2 weekends of February. So, yeah. It'll be break the next weekend, live stream the weekend after, break the weekend after, and then 2 consecutive weeks of live stream. So, I will keep you up to date and all that stuff. And I shall see you all in a couple of weeks.